Welcome to the deep dive. We are really thrilled you're joining us today because, well, we are getting into a situation that I guarantee you have experienced at some point.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone has.
Right. You know that specific feeling when you finally get your hands on a powerful new piece of technology? You slice the tape on the box, you pull out the hardware, and maybe it even has that fresh electronic smell.
Best smell in the world.
It is. And you plug it in, and you are totally ready to just change the world. Or, well, in this case, make some really cool noise. But then you hit a massive
A
wall.
completely infuriating wall. Yeah.
You open up the factory manual, and instead of a clear roadmap to all this creative power you just bought, you are met with this confusing, poorly translated, tiny font booklet. It essentially reads like stereo instructions from Mars.
It's the ultimate momentum killer.
Yeah.
I mean, you go from pure, unadulterated creative inspiration to just absolute technical frustration in about 30 seconds flat. You're just left staring at a screen wondering what on earth you just spent your money on.
Okay, let's unpack this because our focus today is a very specific, incredibly elegant solution to the exact universal problem. We're looking at an independent 35-page PDF guide. It was created by a web developer and digital commerce manager named Bob Afifi.
Who clearly got just as frustrated as the rest of us and decided to actually do something about it.
Exactly. So he wrote the SmartBox Complete User Guide, and this is for the SONICAKE SmartBox QME20 guitar pedal. Now, relying on the original, poorly translated manual that comes with this pedal, it's like being handed a massive box containing all the parts to a high-performance jet engine, but the only instruction you get is a list of the metal alloys used to make the screws.
That is painfully accurate.
Right. It tells you what things are, but gives zero context on how they actually fit together to make the machine fly. Having Baba Fifi's guide is like having a master mechanic standing right there in your room, pointing out exactly where to start.
Which is a beautiful way to phrase it, because this particular piece of hardware, the SmartBox QME20, it is doing an astonishing amount of heavy lifting. And what's fascinating here is that we aren't just looking at Bob's guide as a simple how-to manual for one specific pedal. We're using it to explore the mechanics of modern guitar processing.
Right, the bigger picture.
Exactly. How a $5 independently researched document can entirely transform a frustrating user experience into this amazing creative playground just by actually explaining the why and the how.
So, to really appreciate the value of Bob's guide, I think we need to understand the sheer volume of features packed into this pedal first.
Oh yeah, it's a lot.
We are talking about a unit that contains over 60 different effects and a complete 9-module signal chain. If you are a guitarist, that 9-module chain isn't just an effect, it is your entire physical guitar rig.
Yep, the pedals, amplifiers, speakers, microphones.
All digitized and crammed into a metal box that you can hold in one hand. It's wild.
And that is exactly where the factory manual completely drops the ball, and where Bob's guide steps in to explain the underlying mechanics. The factory manual just lists the modules like a bulleted list. Right. But Bob's guide explicitly maps the exact flow of the signal. And he explains why the order actually matters. The signal chain goes like this. It's noise reduction into FX1.
And FX1's usually what, like a compressor?
Yeah, compressor or a wah pedal. Then from there, it goes into your drive module. Then it hits the AMP module, goes into the IR, which is the impulse response. Then hits your EQ into FX2 for modulation, into delay, and finally washes out into the reverb module.
Okay, let's pause right there because the mechanics of that order are crucial, right? If you just have a list of features without understanding the physics of sound, you can easily just ruin your tone.
Oh, completely.
For instance, why does the overdrive go before the amp, but the reverb goes at the very end of that chain?
Well, that comes down to how sound waves interact in the real world. If you put a reverb effect, which simulates the echoing sound of a large room before your overdrive module, you are applying heavy distortion to all those complex echoes. Yeah, the result is just a muddy, chaotic mess of frequencies clashing together. It sounds terrible.
Yeah.
But if you place the overdrive first, you distort the clean guitar signal, and then that nicely distorted tone bounces around the virtual room created by the reverb.
So it sounds massive and clear.
Exactly. And the factory manual just doesn't teach you that logic. Bob's pedagogy is entirely different. He explains when to use each setting, what it actually sounds like, and why you'd choose it over the alternatives.
Which is massive for navigating the menus. Because, if you're staring at a tiny LCD screen on a dark stage and it just says something cryptic like US Tweet or Brit 800, that could literally mean almost anything.
It's basically a guessing game.
Right, but Bob's guide actually decodes this. He documents over 35 specific amp models, explicitly referencing the real-world gear.
Yeah, because manufacturers of these multi-effects pedals usually obscure the names of the amplifiers they're simulating to avoid copyright infringement.
They don't want to get sued.
Exactly. They can't legally print Fender on the digital screen, so they use vague descriptors. Bob's guide acts as a translator, explicitly calling out the classic names you were actually looking for.
Right.
He maps the digital models to Fender, Marshall, Mesa, VOX, Diesel, ENGL, Bogner, Soldano, PV, and Orange. It connects the abstract digital interface back to the physical amplifiers that musicians already understand.
Now, I have to admit, when I was first reading through the source material, I found myself getting a little skeptical.
Oh, really? How come?
Well, I was thinking, okay, if you're a serious guitarist dropping money on a complex 60-effect modeling pedal, shouldn't you already know what a Mesa Boogie or an Orange amp sounds like? I mean, do you really need a guide to hold your hand and tell you that a Marshall has a mid-range bite?
No, it is a totally fair pushback. You assume there's a baseline level of knowledge when someone buys a piece of pro-level audio gear.
Right. But the more I looked at Bob's approach, I realized my assumption was just wrong. It's not about teaching a guitarist what an amp sounds like in theory. It's about the interface itself.
The physical interaction, yeah.
Yeah, because turning physical knobs on a real wooden amplifier is intuitive. You turn the treble up until it sounds good. But navigating a digital menu where presence is represented by a value from 0 to 100 on a tiny glowing screen, that is paralyzing.
You hit the nail on the head. That is the concept of decision fatigue. And that is why the most valuable part of this section of the guide isn't just the naming conventions, it is the starter settings.
Yes, the starter settings.
Yeah, Bob provides baseline numerical settings for every single one of those 60-plus effects and amp models.
Because dialing in virtual knobs can literally take forever. You can easily spend 3 hours tweaking EQ frequencies and just completely forget to actually practice your instrument.
We've all been there.
Bob's starter settings get you to a usable musical tone immediately. You aren't menu diving for weeks just to get a good crunch sound. You dial in his numbers and you are playing your guitar in 5 minutes.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of user experience, it highlights a massive blind spot in how tech companies design products today. They pack in 60 effects, they create near infinite tweakability, and they think they've provided incredible value.
But they haven't.
No. Unlimited options without a curated starting point just create anxiety. By providing those starter settings, Bob removes the friction between the user and the tool. He lets the technology get out of the way of the creativity.
So let's say you've used those starter settings, you have this incredible tone crafted through that 9-module chain, and the natural next step for any musician is wanting to record it.
Naturally. You want to capture that lightning in a bottle.
Exactly. Which brings us to the studio side of the pedal, specifically the USB workflows.
We're looking at Chapter 7 of the guide here, which covers global settings. And this is where the contrast between the factory documentation and Bob's manual becomes truly staggering. According to the sources, the original manual treats USB audio as a total afterthought.
It's basically just a bullet point saying, you can plug this into a computer.
Precisely. Yeah. Which is totally useless when you actually open up your digital audio workstation, your DAW, like Pro Tools or Logic. But Bob Afifi explicitly details 3 distinct, named recording scenarios, complete with step-by-step DAW instructions.
Wow.
Yeah, he breaks down wet recording, reamping, and loopback.
Okay, let's break those down because digital audio routing can be a complete nightmare. Wet recording makes sense. You are capturing the fully processed sound with all your digital amps and reverbs baked into the track.
Right.
But explain the mechanics of the reamp workflow. Why would a home studio musician want to do that?
Well, reamping is a brilliant technique used in professional studios, and Bob explains exactly how to do it with this specific pedal over USB. When you record wet, you're committing to that sound.
It's locked in.
Right. So if you decide 2 weeks later that your guitar has too much distortion, you literally have to re-record the entire performance.
Which is agonizing if you played the solo of your life.
Exactly. You can never get that magic back.
Yeah.
So in a reamp workflow, the pedal sends a completely dry, uncolored, unprocessed signal of your guitar strings directly to the computer via USB, The computer records that raw performance.
Okay, got it.
Then, while you are mixing the song later, you route that raw audio track from the computer back into the pedal via USB, run it through the amp models and effects, and record the output.
Oh, that's amazing.
It allows you to tweak the amp settings, change the distortion, or swap the speaker cabinet model while sitting in the context of the full mix, long after the guitar was actually played.
It's like shooting photography in raw format instead of a baked JPEG. You capture all the raw data of the light so you can completely change the exposure and color balance later without degrading the image.
That is a perfect analogy.
But trying to configure that two-way USB routing without a guide, it's honestly like trying to wire a complex home theater system blindfolded. You are just randomly assigning inputs and outputs in your DAW, praying you don't create a feedback loop that completely blows your studio monitors.
It's terrifying.
Bob laying out the reamp workflow step by step is just a massive time saver.
And he doesn't stop there. He details the loopback function as well. The mechanism here is routing the computer system audio, like a YouTube backing track or a drum loop, into the pedal, mixing it with your live guitar tone, and sending a combined stereo signal back out via USB.
Which is an absolute necessity if you are live streaming on Twitch or recording guitar covers for social media.
And speaking of looping, the guide takes a deep dive into the pedal's built-in looper function. It doesn't just say, press the button to loop. It explores the mechanical difference between pre- and post modes.
Let's dig into that. What is actually happening in the signal chain when you switch between pre- and post looping?
So it changes where the recording block sits in that 9-module chain. In pre-mode, the looper is the very beginning of the chain. It records the dry, raw signal of your guitar string before it hits the amp or effects.
Yeah.
This means you can record a chord progression, let it loop endlessly, and then use your hands to tweak the digital knobs on the amp or delay to craft your tone while the pedal basically plays the guitar for you.
Well, that's incredibly clever. It's essentially a live hardware version of reamping.
It is. It's so useful.
Yeah.
And then in purse mode, the looper sits at the very end of the chain. It records the fully processed sound.
So the effects are baked in.
Right. This allows you to lay down a clean, ambient chord progression with lots of reverb, and then switch the pedal to a heavy distortion lead channel and play over the top of the loop without distorting the clean chords you just recorded.
That makes total sense.
And Bob's guide explains this utility perfectly, along with how to properly overdub and how to sync the looper's BPM with the pedal's onboard drum machine so your loops stay perfectly in time.
Here is where it gets really interesting, though. Everything we've talked about so far, the amp models, the USB recording, the looper, that is all fantastic. But it is somewhat standard table stakes for modern digital pedals. But this deep dive scales up significantly when we get to the power user capabilities, because the guide shows how this $150 piece of hardware integrates with cutting-edge open source technology.
You are talking about the capability to load external NAMs and IRs. This is truly where the SmartBox QME20 flexes its modern muscle and where a plain English guide becomes entirely indispensable.
Right, because if you don't understand the underlying technology, these acronyms just look like alphabet soup.
Lovely.
Break down the mechanics for us. What exactly is an NM and what is an IR? How do they fundamentally change the sound of the pedal?
Okay, let's start with IR, which stands for impulse response. Think of an IR as a high-definition acoustic fingerprint of a physical space and a physical speaker cabinet. Traditionally, to get a good guitar sound on a record, you had to take a specific microphone, place it a few inches away from a vibrating paper seeker cone inside a wooden box, and capture how the air moved.
Which requires an acoustically treated room, expensive mics, and the ability to turn a real amp up to absolutely deafening volumes. Exactly. Not great for an apartment. So an impulse response is a digital file that mathematically perfectly captures that physical interaction, the speaker, the microphone, and the room. When you load a custom IR into the pedal, you are essentially swapping out the digital speaker cabinet for a photorealistic capture of a real one.
And then there's NAM, which stands for Neural Amp Models. This is where artificial intelligence enters the chat, right?
It is. Traditional digital modeling, like the amp models built into the pedal at the factory, uses complex algorithms written by engineers to mimic how vacuum tubes behave. But neural amp modeling uses machine learning.
Wow.
Yeah, it sends a test signal through a real physical boutique amplifier, records the output, and trains a neural network to perfectly replicate the dynamic saturation curve and behavior of that specific piece of hardware.
And the brilliant thing about Bob's guide is that it doesn't just tell you that the pedal can load these files, it points you to the exact external resources you need. He walks you through using community-driven open-source sites like tonehunt.org. This is a major paradigm shift. Bob explains how to scour these open-source platforms for incredibly accurate, user-created NAM captures of legendary amplifiers that would normally cost thousands of dollars.
Right, right.
And then, crucially, he walks you through the exact mechanism of transferring those files onto the pedal's hardware. He covers using the SONICAKE Manager software on Mac or Windows via USB, or doing it completely wirelessly using the SONICAKE LNK app on an iOS or Android device.
Which really highlights a massive shift in the music gear industry. When you have guides directing users to platforms like tonehunt.org, it proves that modern hardware is no longer a closed, proprietary ecosystem.
Definitely.
You aren't just stuck with the sounds the manufacturer designed in a lab. The pedal just becomes a blank canvas, a vessel for the entire internet's collective tone crafting ability.
It is a vessel, but it raises an important point. A vessel is entirely useless if you don't know how to pour the water into it. And that brings us to what might be the most technically dense part of the guide.
Which is?
Chapter 12, which unpacks the complete MIDI CC table.
Ah, MIDI, the language of electronic instruments that was invented in the 1980s and somehow still manages to terrify half the musicians I know today.
It can be highly intimidating because it is essentially computer programming. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. It doesn't transmit audio, it transmits data commands. And Bob's guide provides all 35 CC numbers necessary for total remote control of the pedal.
Let's clarify that term because CC gets thrown around a lot. What does continuous controller actually mean in practice? How does a number translate to a physical change in the sound?
So a continuous controller, or CC message, is a data stream that sends a value from 0 to 127. Think of it like a digital knob. If you map a CC number to the volume parameter, a value 0 is silence, and 127 is maximum volume.
Okay.
But it also acts as a digital switch. If you send a value of 127 to the CC number that controls the overdrive module, the overdrive turns on. Send 0, and it turns off.
So how does the guitarist actually use this on stage?
By integrating an external Bluetooth MIDI controller, which is essentially a wireless floorboard with extra foot switches. Bob's guide gives you the exact numerical codes required so you can program that external floorboard to trigger the pedal's looper transport, tap in a new BPM on the fly, or selectively toggle individual modules in that 9-effect chain on and off from across the stage.
That's crazy.
And all without ever bending down to touch the pedal itself.
It turns a simple tabletop device into a completely automated live performance rig. But, as we all know, when you start combining Bluetooth MIDI, neural network amp models, USB audio routing, and a 9-module digital signal chain, things will inevitably go wrong. It is technology. It crashes. It glitches.
Oh, always. Which brings us to the reality of user experience. When the technology inevitably fails, how does the manufacturer help you? Well, the factory manual leaves you completely stranded. It has exactly 4 generic bullet points for troubleshooting the entire unit.
4 bullet points. For a pedal doing that much heavy digital lifting, let me guess, one of them is literally, is the unit plugged into the wall?
It basically is, yeah. Now, contrast that staggering lack of support with Bob Afife's diagnostics section. He approaches troubleshooting like an IT professional. He details over 30 specific, identifiable problems paired with specific, actionable fixes.
And he structures it brilliantly, because when you are troubleshooting a piece of gear, you are usually holding a guitar, standing in a room, and you are already deeply annoyed.
Sweating.
Yeah. You do not want to read paragraphs of technical philosophy. You want to identify the symptom and go directly to the cure.
Right. The mechanism of his troubleshooting guide relies on logical categorization. He breaks those 30-plus issues down across 6 distinct categories: what to do if there is no power, what to do if there is power but no sound, how to eliminate unwanted humming or noise, how to resolve USB connection dropouts, how to fix poor sound quality or clipping, and finally, exact instructions on how to package information to contact SONICAKE support if the hardware has suffered a physical failure.
And that logical structure really speaks to the overall formatting of the guide, which we absolutely need to talk about because the navigation itself is a feature. This isn't just a flat scanned text document.
Far from it. It is entirely built around navigational efficiency. It's an instant download PDF, and the version we are looking at is fully updated for firmware v1.0.1. But the brilliance is in the digital typesetting.
Right. The links.
Yeah, it features a fully hyperlinked table of contents and 2-level PDF bookmarks, meaning you can jump instantly from a broad chapter down to a specific submenu setting with just one click.
It even includes a quick reference cheat sheet, It maps out all the physical foot switch combinations and hidden shortcuts on a single printable page. But my absolute favorite feature, and the one that proves Bob is a web developer who understands how people search for information, is the
Oh,
index.
the index is fantastic.
He built an index of over 80 specific technologies and terms across 9 different categories. If you want to know exactly where the term reamp is mentioned anywhere in the document, you hit the index, click the word, and boom, you are teleported to the exact paragraph.
He treats the user experience of reading the manual as a core feature of the product itself.
And I just have to pause and point out the wild irony of this entire situation. The copyright date on this guide is 2025, and we have a solitary web developer, Bob Afifi, working entirely independently.
Just one guy.
And this one guy managed to research, typeset, format, and author a manual that is vastly superior to the document created by the multi-million-dollar tech manufacturer that actually built the hardware. It drives home the absolute truth that good design isn't just about the physical microchips and DSP processors inside the pedal. The hardware is only as good as the user's ability to navigate it. If you can't find the feature basically doesn't exist.
That is the core insight we can extract from this deep dive. The factory manual was clearly a direct translation from Chinese engineering documents. It suffers from awkward phrasing, missed nuances, and a total lack of practical context.
Right.
But every single sentence in Bob's guide was written from scratch for English speakers, prioritizing plain English context. It acts as the necessary translation layer between highly complex engineering and intuitive human creativity.
Okay, let's bring this all together. What is the ultimate takeaway here? For a one-time purchase of just $5 on Gumroad, Bob Afifi's guide completely rescues the SmartBox QME20. It takes a piece of hardware that could easily become a menu-diving headache, something that frustrates musicians so much it ends up collecting dust in a closet, and turns it into a fully understood, incredibly potent tool.
It radically accelerates the learning curve.
Exactly. It takes you from struggling to dial in basic overdrive tone to instantly loading up starter settings for 60-plus effects. It demystifies the mechanics of the hardware, opening the door to advanced DAW reamping workflows, custom neural amp models and impulse responses, and full wireless MIDI control. It proved that plain English instructions are just as important as the technology itself. It is probably the best $5 a SmartBox owner could possibly spend.
It undoubtedly is. And frankly, analyzing this guide leaves us with a much broader philosophical question to ponder about the tech industry as a whole.
Yeah.
If a single independent creator can dramatically multiply the functional value of a piece of hardware just by writing human-centric workflows and providing practical context, what does that reveal about the massive blind spots of modern tech manufacturers?
That is a great point. Are these companies so hyper-focused on packing in 60-plus effects, complex neural network integrations, and infinitely deep signal chains that they've entirely forgotten about the human being who actually has to stand in a room and step on the pedal? You can build the most powerful high-performance engine in the world, but if you just hand the driver a box of loose parts and a dictionary, they are never going to win the race. Sometimes you don't need more features. You just really need that master mechanic in the room to show you how to turn the key.